Welcome to the Lockdown Podcast. We've got movies, we've got TV shows, we've got inane banter. They've stopped making new stuff, so we've gone back to old stuff. We haven't run out of food yet, but we almost certainly will. Certain death. Spend the rest of your life as you lived, consuming meaningless noise. Donate to our Patreon, or our children will be Patreon. And blood on your hands. End of days, Bunkercast.
So this is not the Check for Traps podcast. This is now the coronavirus plague lockdown podcast, focusing exclusively on plague lockdown movies. I'm Josh.
I'm Arron.
And I am Reuben.
We are the Plague Jar.
Well, yeah, nice. Live from the bunker. Boom.
From the bunker. This is the equivalent of the Conelrad emergency broadcasting system, except with reviews for films that are old, and some of you will be too young to have seen.
Because you see, they've stopped making new films now, which means we need to go back in time. Much like this film.
Much like Bruce Willis in 12 Monkeys. This was a suggestion from our Reuben, and I think it's a pretty good one. I didn't realise how on point it was going to be. Despite the fact I've seen this movie, I didn't even remember that it involved plague, but I did remember that the lady was not a scientist, she sold insurance. So
my father's favourite film, alongside Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is his other favourite film. I guess he's got two, Greedy Bastard. But yeah, he loves this film. He absolutely loves it.
How old
I thought being that it's plague related and it's which I guess is quite an unconventional sci-fi, because the majority of sci-fi things that, or at least the sci-fi things that I tend to watch, are utopian futures such as Star Trek, where there's, money's been abolished and they've got incredible technology. Whereas in this future, they all live in an underground shithole, and the only technology they seem to have developed is a floating TV and the ability to send people through time.
And also to raise a chair up a wall, presumably to be more intimidating.
I noticed that.
No, that's all technology. They took that from... Do you remember Get Your Own Back, where they had to crank it up? Crank it up!
I think of almost nothing else day in, day out.
Yeah, it's a relic from Get Your Own Back. Dave Benson Phillips himself had donated that chair to the Save Humanity.
The main thing that I love about this movie, and that I think relates most explicitly to the current situation we're in, is that unlike other science fiction, everyone in it is an idiot, no one knows what they're doing, and they spend a critical amount of time pursuing completely the wrong solution.
We do see in two separate scenes Bruce Willis's naked arse being scrubbed with a soapy mop, which you viewers at home should be doing to avoid the coronavirus. Scrub your relatives thoroughly. If you don't have a mop, try getting a Brillo pad or some sandpaper. Scrub them. Scrub everybody.
Do you recommend,
Otherwise you're going to get
Reuben, do you recommend that they be scrubbed when they enter the house or outside the house in public view?
Both.
Both.
Scrub them on the way in and the way out.
Jesus.
Scrub everyone. Scrub your hands vigorously for 20 seconds.
I'm scrubbing my hands right now.
Good boy, well done.
I haven't stopped washing my hands. They're red raw and they bleed now.
That's good. That's getting rid of the germs. The blood is flowing them away downstream.
Did anyone else think that Bruce Willis had quite an impressive arse in this movie? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say
he's
I thought it was
in
very
good shape back then, yeah. So in 1995, he was in good lick. I'll tell you what.
Pulp Fiction had revitalised his career.
Doing a lot of squats.
Brad Pitt was very young in this film as well. It must be one of his earliest roles.
Also, if Thelma and Louise is the breakout one, that was 1991. I checked while we were watching it. So this was, 4 years after that? And then
95.
And then 4 years before Fight Club. So yeah, it was a weird one, like an intermediary one.
Does anyone think that the period between, let's say 89, 90, fall of Soviet Union, and 2001 is a real weird time for films?
Definitely.
And culture in general, I guess. Obviously, sort of like the Fukushima end of history vibe. I kept thinking about that when I was watching this. It was really, really strange to me, because most post-apocalypse is nuclear, just because, for the majority of the time film has been around, the Cold War was on. But obviously now we're getting to the point where that's no longer the case. And then I was thinking about everything sort of after 9/11 takes on sort of that fascistic post-apocalypse. That this is really in between. Like you said, an utterly incompetent, not even world order, bunker, essentially. It's not even really made clear how many people are left in this society, just that there is a prison system. We're never really given any window into how the society functions.
Yeah, because it's to assume that he's not only is he in this underground society, that he's a criminal in this underground society and has been incarcerated. So other people might be living slightly better than he does.
Well, yeah,
but he
definitely.
is kept in a glorified animal cage, isn't he?
Yeah,
And then
which
he's
is
winched out.
Which is again is interesting because it implies that humanity is at a point where they can supply food to an inactive criminal surplus population, which is something that Battlestar Galactica tries to deal with. And ultimately the debate is, if we're starving, do we have any need or desire to keep a prison population? So they're clearly doing all right there.
I guess the population is much less. Like, only 1% of people survived, didn't they?
Well, yeah,
they've got less to worry
but
about.
that's less people to farm as well, and also presumably
Also
farming not
true.
great underground. They're still living off mushrooms.
They're very mushroom-based diet, I'd imagine. Yeah.
Do you guys think that his pardon actually would have taken him anywhere? I kind of like to... Because so little is confirmed in 12 Monkeys about the real world. Like, sometimes I wonder if he actually did commit a crime, being a bit lame here, but in the same way that they're just like, we need volunteers, and then they pull you out literally like in chains, it could just as easily be that there was no crime, they just incarcerate people and tell them it's because...
I guess that's due to the nature of the film and how it tries to make you question what's right. It can never show you too much about the society. But yeah, I mean, there's no reason to assume. We never see any member of society, do we? That's not the scientists or Jose or Bruce Willis.
Yeah, there's like the guard guy, isn't there? The military guy. And the butt scrubbers. Imagine that being your full-time job.
Yeah, like the world ends and you end up being a butt scrubber.
Yeah.
It's like in the Flintstones, though. It's just, you turn to the camera and say, it's a living.
It's true, at least they're not mixing cement in your mouth or anything like that. That would be...
I was thinking while we were watching this, Arron, because Bruce Willis makes consistent reference to the fact that they picked him because he has a very good memory, and how one thing I'm looking forward to in like the corona, climate change, desolated future is sending you back in time with a bunch of perfectly memorized but inaccurate information and knowing that you are somewhere in like the middle noughties running around chasing the wrong leads. Just because that would be quite entertaining.
Like a fake mustache and like bangs, just being like.
We're going to send him back to the early 1900s to prevent the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Oh,
but by accident, we're going to actually send him to assassinate the band Franz Ferdinand.
I say, take me out. I killed them all.
I'm sorry, Dr. Jack. The science of teleportation is not an exact science.
It's alright, I've been drinking since 7 in the morning. We'll try again.
You killed Rio Ferdinand. I'm sorry.
What would you say your favourite parts of this film are?
Oh yeah, sorry, I really like Brad Pitt. I thought he was fucking fantastic.
Yeah, I would say the same thing.
Especially like his character was completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
Everything. That was fucking fantastic.
He's a big red herring, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
I think he does a really good job of playing lunatic. And I was saying before we start recording, wasn't it? It has some very similar vibes to Leon Professional, where it seems the whole thing's a little bit over the top, but it's done in such a way that bodes well for it, I think. His insanity is a bit ridiculous, but it's very good. And he does a very good job of being a complete nutter.
No, definitely.
I just really it's like multiple bits, but for instance, the homeless guy who speaks to him and his psychiatrist talking about, he obviously at some point has like a knowledge of the fact he's come from the future, but then later on doesn't. And I like the whole up in the air nature of certain characters. Are they also from the future, which we know some of them are, or are they just crazies? And I like that whole, we know as the audience the apocalypse is about to happen, which throws, say, street preachers talking about the end times into a new light. Yeah, I think it just recontextualizes everyday things in a really, really fun way. I liked it a lot.
I was actually going to mention this. So, given that their policy and like given the establishing lines at the beginning about how they say like none of the volunteers ever came back, and presumably means they've done this, let's say, a lot of times, like more than 20 times. Surely, given the effect like Bruce Willis had on the time stream, that is like a very reckless and insane thing to do, which as we know is incompetent. But I thought it was weird that we didn't have more examples of these people affecting the future, because again, like I know it wasn't, what's the word?
Yeah, I know what you mean. That would have been good if he'd done some very minor things that when he goes back to the future, they didn't have to mention anything, but really subtly, like in the background, those things had like a massive effect.
Yeah,
on
well, not even
the world that he knows now.
Maybe not even like that, because again, I think it's implied to be secular, but just like how did none of the other volunteers have any impact? Like sending someone back from the future with knowledge and a mission and stuff. Did they all just rip out their teeth and go quietly to living? thing. I would have quite liked I'm amazed he didn't run into more people like that homeless guy, especially near the end. I guess again it was probably all sacrificed on the altar of like the vague mindfuckery, but it's something I would have thought would be really interesting, and again would have been really funny to highlight how insanely reckless this policy is from the Bureau of Scientists' point of view.
I mean, life is way too short, and I will never watch the 12 Monkeys TV series, but that's probably the kind of thing that they made them decide, oh, we could milk this for, like a 12 episode thing, because there is a lot in it that just gets very briefly touched on, and that's an example of that.
You're definitely right, because that's a great like episodic thing as well. Like you send him back in time because it's like, yet another one of our poorly trained convict time travelers has gone rogue. Would you believe it? You got to hunt him down.
You know how they say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again?
Well,
expecting a different result.
That was this film, and it was fantastic. That was fantastic. That's why I really enjoyed it. And again, I liked that in terms of between like insanity and time. I mean, they're always great bedfellows anyway, but this film did that really well. But I do think it took too long to get to it, because like I said, for the first 20 minutes, I thought that you guys were showing me an absolute dud. Like I thought it was fucking awful. But thankfully, it really picked up. It was it was a very strange 20 minutes.
It is a weird ride, isn't it? I think it is a very good, maybe a bit too on the nose, but it's a good way of pointing out the inefficiency of bureaucracy, especially around mental health. Everyone second guesses Bruce Willis's character for the entire thing. Like, obviously, goes in there, everyone thinks he's a lunatic, goes to the mental asylum, people at the mental asylum think he's nuts, the people in his own time think he's nuts, the doctor that he falls in love with thinks he's nuts as well. Then obviously we have that dynamic change where he begins to believe that he is insane, and the doctor realises that he's actually correct, going by the photograph of him in the First World War, and
the convenient photograph.
The convenient photograph of which we didn't actually see a photographer. And the boy in the barn as well.
I think the thing about like that spin that I find like difficult is that it's kind of like it's bittersweet, because I really, really like the idea that his knowledge of the future is so unacceptable that it's easier for him to believe that he's insane. So I think that I'm not trying to like poison the mood or anything, but I think a lot of people actually feel that way now, and probably did in the past with like the threat of like nuclear annihilation and stuff. But at the same time, the psychiatrist is obviously supposed to be a rational, intelligent person, and even though he was right about the boy in the well who turned out to be in the barn, that does not mean, ergo, he is a time traveller from the future and everyone is definitely about to be wiped out by, a super flu. But she takes that one data point and extrapolates from it that all of this fantastic stuff is true, and then becomes literally the craziest character in the movie.
Yeah, I did think at one point, like, it didn't really deal with her acceptance of everything very well. And again, like, I think you said a couple of moments, it really strains believability when she doesn't just leave. And then, like you said, she switches from that to being so incredibly on board with everything. And like, to be fair, like, 10 out of 10 supportive towards Bruce Willis's goal. But perhaps, like, to a really weird degree, given everything that happened
especially for a woman whose full-time job is to deal with psychotic lunatics. She's probably heard it all before, right?
Well, it tries to handwave it with, like, she's like, I've got a feeling about him or whatever. She says that at the beginning. Yeah. And it's like, I guess the idea is she's supposed to be able to intuit who's a crazy person and who isn't. But again, just a very 90s view of mental health, perhaps.
Yeah. If we take that character as being a real person, if it wasn't Bruce Willis, it would have been the next, like, moderately charming, insane person who came through. She was essentially Harley Quinn waiting to happen. If it wasn't Bruce Willis, it would be the Joker. And she would be in a jumpsuit, like, lowering people into vats of acid. So.
And all it would take is one piece of 1990s Photoshop.
It didn't even look like it was definitely Bruce Willis in the picture.
No.
It was just like a naked, bald man with, kind of like a flat nose, and it was like, right, that's all I need. That's all I need. Here's a gun, we're going to the airport.
Yeah, between that and the fact that, he might have got an antique bullet shot in his leg, which in America doesn't strike me as the most impossible thing in the world.
No.
She's a lady of science. And as we've worked out, like I said, she's a combat medic as well. She successfully dislodged what must be now a significantly healed over bullet. I thought he'd got shot in the scene before, or like in the he'd been wounded in the altercation, but no, it's the bullet wound that he sustained 2 days ago.
Well, because he gets in the car. When he gets in the car after that has happened, he says that he'd been sleeping rough on the streets, but when they showed the leg, he was still bleeding. So you're right. I mean, how long?
That is true.
Didn't make much sense to me.
I do think it's perfectly reasonable that she'd be able to dress a wound, but yeah,
dress a wound. Agree. Remove a bullet. Some especially so World War One ballistic, like that's had like plenty of time, as we, between 2 days and quite a few nights to nuzzle in. Though equally is still actively bleeding. But we have no idea what's going on with that scene. Time travel shenanigans. I do think it's quite a stretch not to kill him doing that.
I guess being shot with a full-on military rifle would probably do more to your leg than just get stuck in your leg.
Well, indeed, yeah. That's the fucking bullet was huge as well. Like that thing.
Yeah,
that thing bored into
303 rifle round.
Yeah,
exactly. Would probably destroy your leg.
Proper fucking bolt action.
Point blank being shot in the leg with a rifle around you.
Yeah, he's been fucking running and fighting on that thing. He's doing alright.
Yeah, that's a good point. He doesn't really spend a lot of time limping around or anything. He's been shot in the leg.
He's pretty much fine as soon as she's done bandaging him up. Just everything.
It's very difficult to do a time travel film without enormous plot holes.
I think it does it well enough. I mean, it sort of does the whole closed loop thing, which I guess is the easiest version of time travel to do. Not that it's ever easy, and I think it largely works really well. I wasn't expecting the ending, as I told you, even up to the second to last scene. I was expecting a different ending to the one that we got.
I like the closed loop in, even though you're right, it is a cliche, but I like the closed loop in time travel movies, especially like dark ones, just because I enjoy like a more depressing ending when this is the kind of genre we're in, and the kind of determinism of it is what makes it so spooky. The fact that you've just watched a whole film of someone trying to resist something and then realizing that just by virtue of having tried to resist it, they've played an active part in making it happen. It's just, it just makes a good ending. I have one closing thing that I like about this movie, and it's that Terry Gilliam was bang on that the climate crackpots would start the flu that would end the world, because as we all know, Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg definitely made the coronavirus. Confirmed.
Josh is a senior member of the XR. He leads a brigade, much like in the IRA.
I'm leaking it. I'm leaking it right now. I'm leaking it in the most obscure way I possibly can.
I was going to say, this is actually a really good way to leak it, because it will take a good couple months for anyone to actually probably fulfilling some sort of obscure exposure compliance agreement as well. So it's all good.
Greta literally gave me like the comically large glass tube.
Oh, you that guy, that creepy guy with the ponytail? Was that you?
That was Greta. I was the security guard.
Oh, I see.
And then I had a good old sniff of it. It was great. Smell like farts.
My closing statement would be that I think it's really weird that this film has had very little cultural impact. I have never heard of it before yesterday.
Oh, that's
I want to say, and like I said, I consider myself pretty around Terry Gilliam in terms of things that he's done. But no one has ever recommended this film. No one has ever talked about this film. Like you said, they apparently made a TV show. No one ever talked about that TV show. No one ever watched that TV show. Brad Pitt certainly has never fucking mentioned this, nor has Bruce Willis. I just think it's.
I can't think of a time when somebody's mentioned it to me outside of my dad saying I love this film and so good need to look at this film. So if we're all having a closing statement, then my closing statement would be to stay at home and wash your hands thoroughly. 20 seconds, rub the palm, interlace your fingers, rub your thumbs, hot water, soap, do it.
It's the only way you can stop XR from saving the planet by wiping.
Otherwise,
it's the only way.
We're going to send Arron back in time to shoot you.
I'll be wearing a dress. I did want to say, I feel that Josh, you would probably make it onto the Science Council in the future.
Thanks, man.
I could see you being there. I reckon they'd be like looking through people, and given how the world ended, they'd be like, well, he saw this coming, so he's probably on the list. He's also
me and Arron would be in the prison cell.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd be so in the prison cell.
Get this man 4 tinnies and a GCSE science textbook. He's going to save the world.
Thank you for listening. We've been Check for Traps. Wash your hands. Watch some films with your loved ones, but only if they live in the same house as you.
And if you have any more plague-related films for us to watch, then go for it, as we'll be reporting from the bunker long after it's done, because we don't look outside.
Remain indoors, treasure these moments. We are all going to die. Thank you very much.
Bye.